moving on to the climate, and I think, as you said, Priya, we have to think about what we're designing not just as products. I mean, it's not just products that we're designing, it's actually services, it's systems, and there's been obviously a lot of talk about moving away from kind of changing the way that we think to a more strategic kind of way of thinking. You touched on it at the world, Eddie, that the world is becoming more complex. We can no longer just design a kettle by thinking about what materials we need and the user interaction and the home. We have to also think about the impact, the energy efficiency. We have to think about the end of life. Where are those materials coming from? Where they're going to go? How is someone going to repair it? How do we increase the longevity of that product? But I'd love to hear from you, Eddie, because obviously you are sustainability lead at one of the biggest design agencies in London. So you have a big responsibility. So starting with you, what are you doing in your practice to start with? And do you have any thoughts about what we should all be doing more of?
Good question. We should all be doing more good work. I think that's the big one, isn't it?
What's good?
Yeah, still trying to figure that one out. I think I'm lucky at Seymour Powell because we've got some really good case studies, and over the last couple of decades of really big sustainability projects. We did the Fairphone back in 2014, 2015. I worked on the Library of Things project a couple of years ago, which was awesome as well. And so the kind of average level of sustainability knowledge in the business is really good. But the key one for me is that you've always got to look out, and you've got to keep kind of bringing on the latest practice, the latest guidance, the latest sources of insight on this topic. I really enjoyed reading Morrama's guide a couple of years ago when you guys released that. That was brilliant. Anyone who follows what the Design Council releases, back in 2019 they did the Systemic Design Framework. I thought that was fantastic as well. The big one for us is that we've brought in, like you were just touching on, that kind of systems thinking level a lot more into our projects. So designers have a really good ability to make complicated things a bit more simple, and we can also kind of zoom in and zoom out really well. You can go from millimeters to kilometers pretty quickly. It stresses out engineers and it stresses out people in other disciplines, but actually designers are pretty good at it. And if anyone is taking notes and wants to read some really exciting stuff about systems thinking, then look up Donella Meadows and 12 leverage points for systems change. It's absolutely a brilliant way of getting into that. But yeah, couldn't stress enough taking that systems thinking perspective. I guess the other one as well is kind of setting the right tone in a sustainability project. It's a really complicated topic. There's no simple solutions in sustainability. We've got this saying, which is, it's a bit like wrestling an octopus. You can grab 2 of the tentacles, but there's another 6 that will get you. It's a properly wicked problem. But when you read more about it, you can end up going down a bit of a rabbit hole, and then you might find yourself in a briefing session thinking, how am I going to deconstruct capitalism with this new piece of packaging? And it's, great thinking, maybe do it in the pub, maybe do it in academic circles, but it's important to remain kind of practical and remain kind of boots on the ground. Don't try and boil the ocean, don't try and do too much. Maintain the ambitious thinking, but, and the final one, it was, I think it's really important that we don't work superficially. Sustainability is a really nebulous topic. It's a really nebulous word. It means so many things to so many people. Get specific, set really clear targets, really clear goals in projects. This phrase, this is more sustainable than that, it doesn't mean anything. Talk about carbon, talk about recycling, talk about ethics and the way we treat people. Talk about really specific topics. It's going to make life so much easier to really measure what you've done. That's some of it, yeah.
Thanks, Eddie. I think a couple of things you touched on. Firstly, the Morrama guide that he's talking about, shameless plug, is sustainabledesignhandbook.com. That will get you to that resource. But something you just mentioned right at the end there is about measurement, and something that we're not very good at as designers. I don't think anyone's very good at it. And one of the challenges, obviously, with life cycle analysis and things like that is you get out what you put in. So if you cherry pick the data, you can kind of curate your answers. And there's lots of brands that have been accused of that, and it sort of undermines the values of measurement tools. But talking about measurement, I mean, I think one of the really important things when it comes to measurement is implementing technology and getting that data. And so Lex, just touching on that, is there something that you're seeing more of? I mean, dare I mention AI in terms of being able to kind of feed into the data that we have and the knowledge that we're capturing to be able to design better?
It's an interesting one, right, when you talk about AI and sustainability, because I feel that's probably one of the biggest areas of training models. If you're training a custom AI model for itself and you host it in a data center, that is a very unsustainable way that we're training these models. Like to train, GPT-4, it costs millions and billions and billions of dollars, plus the energy consumption is really high. So there is going to be this conversation which probably will eventually happen. Obviously, one of the hardest things when you interact with a digital interface or a digital product is you don't really think about the materials or that cost when you think of physical or a packaging and you got to throw that in the bin or recycle and that particular thing. So you're always interacting with this interface, but there's so much layers behind that interface and there's that interesting energy cost. I think there is a conversation about generative AI in terms of would the future be, would everybody have their own sort of smaller sort of language model who could study them, understand them, and it could be trained by themselves in a more simple and efficient way. But there's also, if that's one side, but there's also interesting work being done by like DeepMind where they have a case study where they talked about how they trained, their machine learning models on how Google operated, and I think they were able to reduce Google's energy costs with this particular models and stuff. So it's like it's such an interesting space, but there's two sides to it. I think there is also that hidden energy cost of data centers, and how do we have an effective way to fix that. Obviously, as designers in the room, that's something that's so hard for us to be able to control, because maybe if you're working in the digital space, if you're somebody who writes code, you're simply just connecting this by a couple lines of code, connecting to an API that exists on another company's server, so you don't really have necessarily that control of those things. But I think it's an area that we also need to start talking about as well. We talk about planetary design and those particular consciousness. How do we use these things in a less energy efficient way and stuff?
I think that's a really interesting thing, because obviously with a physical product, it is physical. You can see the materials, you can rip it apart, you can see the components, you can imagine the processes that have gone into actually manufacturing those things. When it's an app, when it's a program, when it's something digital, then it's so difficult to kind of join the dots with the impact that's having every time you interact with it, every time you're kind of pulling data from a server, or you're asking something to kind of to do some thinking, basically. And so actually really understanding the trade-offs between the benefits that potentially those learning models will have and the impact that they're having by purely just working behind the scenes. Something that, again, it's easy to sort of just forget. Priya, I'd like to ask you a little bit more to kind of expand on how we remain perhaps positive as designers facing a kind of climate crisis. I mean, we all have to bear that weight on our shoulders of the fact that we're working in an industry reliant on production and consumption. Brands are constantly racing to bring more products to the market. We all talked about today how money is a problem and it's really difficult to turn down a project. So how do we kind of like battle through that, put that to one side and really just find the joy again with designing, but still kind of considering obviously the planet as an important stakeholder in that process?
It's a great question, Joe, and I think it goes back to the conversation we were having earlier about openness and open source. And you started a great initiative 18 weeks ago, starting your LinkedIn posts, reaching out to people, having open conversations about topics, which I think is great because all of us are having the same questions and we don't really share that. And I think the first thing is to start having conversations with people who you don't normally talk to. So you're not just confirming your biases. You're not just having a, whinge. You're actually learning some new information, and you might find a new partner to work together from a different discipline. I think that's really important, and it's coming to evenings like this that D&AD is convening is really useful, because speaking to somebody new, who knows, you might find a different way to reframe the problem. But I think positivity is actually just like exercise. It's a muscle you got to use every day. I think the current environment where everything is like, it's horrible, there's climate change, things are dark, I think that's a huge sign of laziness. It's really like sitting on the couch and just, doom scrolling and just thinking this is it. I don't have to do anything, it's all done. I feel that we can do better than that. I mean, remember the time when you guys were kids and you found something like a conker when you were like running around and you looked at a conker and you started playing with conkers. I know I'm going really left field here, but there was a certain joy. And if you think about the product design of a conker and you think about how wonderfully it's designed, there's so many things which are there in your everyday walk. I've been collecting leaves which are just turning red. And it's nothing great. It's just the way nature's dying, but it dies so beautifully. So death can be beautiful. It doesn't have to be horrible. We just don't lack the imagination to celebrate things which have an end of life, because we're thinking, oh my God, how do I tell this in a responsible way? It's really fucking dull. It's really boring. I mean, I find sustainability deeply boring and extremely moralizing. I'm so done with it. I'm sorry. I think we really need to kind of almost step back and remember humor, play, all these kind of emotions is what make people take attention. And that's exactly what social media platforms do with influencers and all those people. They know how to tell a story and tell a story really well. And the reason I say this is because in D&AD, I'm also a judge in the impact part, and we see a lot of impact entries where people are telling all sorts of stories about certain causes. But at the end of the day, when you think about what really sticks in your mind, is there's a certain level of authenticity and simplicity and a kind of rigor in the craft that goes in. Just because you're saving the world doesn't mean your typography needs to suck. I'm sorry, I'm not buying that. Good kerning can save the world. I'm sorry. It has to go back to first principles. And this is where I feel as designers, if we embrace beauty, but almost like a punk, and say it has to be bloody beautiful, I'm going to own it, people will take up a notice and change their behavior. And then we have lots of designers who've done that in the past. We have such a good lineage where people actually made things beautiful and were unapologetic about it. I want to make things fucking pretty. I have no problems with that. So that's where the joy comes. If you're able to create joy in somebody else's life, really take that extra mile, get the kerning right, get the feel on the material right, all those small details is going to put the smile on somebody's face to take notice of the next part. Whether it's a Tesla car, they check their energy. Those are the small details, all of which will create the behavior change. But you can't accept that people are going to change their behavior just because you're telling them, hey, I'm going to save the world. You got to do X or Y. This is where I feel we need to be a lot more playful. Sorry, I got a bit livid there, but
I love it. Absolutely love it. And I think it's absolutely what we need to hear right now. It's really difficult sometimes to just find the motivation to keep going when you feel like everything you're doing, every change you have to make feels like a compromise. It feels like, oh, well, I have to choose between doing it this way, which I really want to do and be really cool, or I have to do it sustainably, and it's going to be boring. It's like, no, not at all. I think we have to remember that's just a challenge. That's just another part of the design brief, and we have to find the passion to, the thing that makes us happy and that makes us really excited at Morrama is when we get a really wicked problem that we have to design for, and that we all have to come together and work collaboratively on it. And if we need to, we bring other people in and we bring that energy in, and we call Priya up and say, give us a pep talk because I need fucking kicking up the ass. And I think, we just need to. If you find yourself in a situation where you're really, really struggling to find that motivation, then get on the phone a friend. We've all watched Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. You've got 3 lifelines, use them.